The laughter from the kitchen sounded exactly like breaking glass. Harper stood over the sink, scrubbing a dried crust of potato salad off a plastic plate. Her mother-in-law had been dead for barely 48 hours. Yet her husband, Derek, was already in the other room, loudly planning what kind of boat he would buy. He was clinking cheap beer bottles with his cousins, his voice booming over the somber hum of the post-funeral reception. Harper felt a hollow ache behind her ribs. For 8 grueling years, she had been the only one wiping Beatrice's brow. She was the one measuring out liquid morphine in the dead of night. Derek had barely stepped foot in his mother's bedroom. He spent his days out in the garage, tinkering with broken lawnmowers and waiting for his inheritance. In the corner of the living room sat Chloe. Derek's sister wore a designer camel coat draped over her shoulders like a cape. She held a glass of white wine, her eyes scanning the cracked plaster walls of the Fishtown row house. This neighborhood used to be nothing but blue-collar sweat and corner dive bars. Now, families from New York were paying nearly $1 million for these narrow and applicanana drafty homes. Chloe did not look at Harper with grief. She looked at her like the hired help who had overstayed her shift. Harper dried her cracked hands on a dish towel, the silence in her head suffocating. Then, her cell phone buzzed in her pocket. It was an unknown number. Harper slipped out through the back door. Stepping onto the freezing concrete of the small patio, she pressed the phone to her ear. A crisp, formal voice introduced himself as Arthur Vance, the estate attorney handling Beatrice's affairs. He asked if Harper was in a safe place to talk. The question sent a sudden chill down her spine. He told her she needed to come to his office the following morning. He stressed that she must come alone. Before the official reading of the will with the rest of the family, the next day, the leather chair in Arthur Vance's office felt cold against Harper's back. The attorney sat behind a massive mahogany desk, sliding a sealed manila envelope toward her. He looked at her with a mixture of pity and profound respect. Beatrice had left a secondary, closed will. He broke the seal and read the words aloud. And the air in the room evaporated. Beatrice had bypassed her own blood. She had left the multi-million-dollar row house, along with every penny of her life savings, entirely and exclusively to Harper. Harper could not breathe. She asked him to repeat it. He did. The shock was a physical blow. Beatrice had seen it all. The old woman in the bed had noticed every cruel remark Derek made, every dismissive eye roll from Chloe. When the siblings were summoned to the office an hour later, the explosion was immediate. Derek hurled a heavy glass paperweight across the room, shattering a framed diploma on the wall. He screamed that Harper had manipulated a dying woman. His face was a dark, venomous purple. The attorney calmly threatened to call the police, forcing Derek back into his chair. Chloe did not yell. Her reaction was far more terrifying. She crossed her legs, her face smoothing out into a mask of pure, absolute ice. She looked at Harper with dead, unblinking eyes. Chloe leaned in and whispered that Harper was a naive little girl playing a dangerous game. She promised Harper that she would sign that house over, or she would spend the rest of her miserable life drowning in legal debt. The psychological warfare started before Harper even made it back to their apartment. She stopped at the corner market to buy a few groceries, her hands still shaking from the confrontation. She stood at the checkout counter, holding a basket of bread, eggs, and milk. The cashier swiped her debit card, and the machine beeped a harsh denial. Harper blinked, apologizing, and asked him to run it again. Declined again. This was the joint account where Harper deposited every single paycheck she earned from her part-time data entry job. It was all her own money. She pulled out her banking app on her phone, and her stomach dropped. The balance was zero. Derek had transferred every cent into a private account. She stood there, humiliated, as the line of customers behind her sighed in frustration. She had to leave the groceries on the counter and walk out into the biting wind, completely penniless. When Harper opened the door to their apartment, the air felt heavy and toxic. Derek was nowhere to be found. But sitting at the small dining table was Chloe. Beside her sat a man in a tailored pinstripe suit, snapping his briefcase shut. This was Eldon, Chloe's high-priced corporate shark of a lawyer. Harper asked how they got in. Chloe ignored the question, smiling a thin, bloodless smile. Eldon slid a single piece of paper across the table. It looked like an old, yellowed document, bearing a signature that loosely resembled Beatrice's handwriting. Eldon spoke in a smooth, patronizing hum. He explained that this was a promissory note. According to this document, Beatrice had borrowed $50,000 from Chloe for medical expenses 3 years ago. Eldon smiled, showing too many teeth. He said that as the sole heir to the estate, Harper was now legally responsible for this debt. Harper knew it was a lie. She had managed every single medical bill for 8 years. There was no loan. Chloe tapped her manicured nails on the table. She told Harper she had 2 choices. Sign away the Fishtown house right now, or they would tie her up in litigation for a decade. Chloe leaned forward, the smell of her expensive perfume suffocating the small kitchen. She said they would bleed Harper dry. They would ruin her credit, destroy her reputation, and leave her homeless. The $50,000 was just the beginning. Harper refused to touch the pen. She ordered them out of her home. Chloe just laughed. A dry, rattling sound. She stood up, buttoned her coat, and promised Harper she would regret this. Within an hour, Harper's phone began exploding with notifications. The family group chats were lighting up. Chloe had orchestrated a flawless smear campaign. Messages poured in from cousins and aunts, calling Harper a gold digger, a parasite, a thief. Derek had posted a long, tearful paragraph about how his greedy wife had brainwashed his dying mother. Harper sat on her bed, clutching her knees, the walls of the tiny bedroom closing in. In the suffocating darkness of her room, a memory flashed into Harper's mind. It was Beatrice's final evening. The old woman had grasped Harper's wrist with surprising strength. Her breathing labored. Beatrice had whispered, "Look beneath the velvet. The truth is in the lining." Harper bolted upright. The old velvet armchair in the Fishtown house? It was Beatrice's favorite spot by the window before she became bedridden. Harper grabbed her coat and rushed out into the freezing night, taking the bus down to Fishtown. When she arrived at the familiar brick row house, she found the front door deadbolt had been completely replaced. Derek had illegally changed the locks. Harper jiggled the handle, panic rising in her throat. She peered through the front window and gasped. The living room was completely ransacked. Cushions were slashed open. Drawers were pulled out and dumped on the floor. Derek and Chloe were looking for something. They knew Beatrice had hidden something. A heavy voice called out from the sidewalk behind her. It was Frank, the gruff, broad-shouldered neighbor who had lived next door for 30 years. He asked Harper what the hell was going on. Frank had seen Derek tearing through the house earlier and knew something was wrong. Harper broke down, explaining the forged document and the stolen money. Frank's face hardened into a scowl of pure disgust. He told Harper he had watched her carry that family on her back for 8 years. He knew Derek was a lazy bum and Chloe was a snake. Frank pointed to the door. He said she was the legal owner of this house, and she had every right to go inside. Frank made a quick phone call to a buddy who ran a 24-hour locksmith service. 20 minutes later, a young guy in a heavy canvas jacket was drilling out Derek's new deadbolt. Harper stepped into the wreckage of the living room. The air smelled of dust and desperation. She ignored the chaos and walked straight to the corner by the window. The old green velvet armchair was overturned, but intact. Derek had not bothered to check it thoroughly. Harper knelt on the floor. Flipping the heavy chair back onto its legs, she ran her hands along the underside. Feeling the dust cover, she pressed her fingers deep into the lining between the springs. Her fingers brushed against something hard and rectangular. She ripped the thin fabric, and a small metal lockbox fell out onto the carpet with a heavy thud. It was unlocked. Inside was a leather-bound notebook and an ancient Liebling. Chunky digital voice recorder. Harper opened the notebook. It was a meticulous ledger. For 8 years, Beatrice had recorded every single cent Derek had stolen from her purse. She had documented every cruel threat Chloe had made. There were bank statements, printed emails, and a signed affidavit from Beatrice herself, notarized by a trusted friend, detailing Chloe's repeated attempts to forge her signature. Before Harper could press play on the recorder, the front door violently banged open. Derek stood in the doorway, his chest heaving, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He saw the notebook in Harper's hands and lunged at her. He grabbed her by the shoulders, slamming her against the wall, screaming that she was a thieving rat. The notebook fell to the floor. But Derek had not noticed the locksmith, who was still packing up his tools in the hallway. The young locksmith dropped his bag, rushed in, and shoved Derek hard against the doorframe, pinning him there. He yelled at Derek to back off before he called the cops. Frank, the neighbor, stepped onto the porch, his massive frame blocking the exit. Frank stared Derek down, telling him he was pathetic. Derek sneered, spat on the floor, and backed away. He told Harper she was dead to him, and that Chloe was going to bury her. He stormed off into the night. Harper picked up her treasures. Her hands were bruised, her heart hammering against her ribs. But her mind was completely clear. The fear was gone. It had burned away, leaving nothing but cold, hardened steel. Back in the safety of her apartment, Harper sat at the kitchen table in the dark. She pressed play on the old digital recorder. The audio was scratchy, but the voices were unmistakable. It was a conversation between Derek and Chloe from 2 years ago. They were standing in Beatrice's kitchen. Chloe's voice came through, cold and calculating. She was suggesting they throw their mother into a cheap state-run facility to bleed her dry and take the house early. Derek laughed and agreed, saying the old bat had lived long enough. Then came Beatrice's voice from a different recording, shaky but full of iron. Beatrice spoke directly into the microphone. She said she was leaving everything to Harper, the only true daughter she ever had, to protect her from the vultures. The next afternoon, there was a sharp knock at the apartment door. It was Chloe. She had come alone this time, confident that Harper was broken. Chloe stepped inside without being invited, her expensive heels clicking loudly on the cheap linoleum floor. Harper subtly pressed the record button on her smartphone and slid it face down onto the kitchen counter. Chloe stood by the sink, oozing false sympathy. She told Harper it did not have to be this ugly. She said the $50,000 debt could just disappear if Harper signed the deed. Harper kept her voice small, playing the victim. She asked Chloe why she was doing this, pointing out that Chloe knew the promissory note was a fake. Chloe laughed. A cruel. Mocking sound. Chloe leaned over the counter, speaking directly toward the hidden phone. She arrogantly boasted that of course the note was fake. She admitted she had paid Eldon $5,000 to mock it up just to scare Harper. She said truth does not matter in court. Only money and power matter. Chloe smiled, told Harper she had 24 hours to surrender, and walked out. Harper picked up her phone. She stopped the recording. A profound, terrifying calm washed over her. She had everything she needed. Sunday morning arrived with a heavy daction. Gray sky. Chloe had organized a grand memorial brunch at Aunt Martha's sprawling suburban home. Aunt Martha was the undisputed matriarch of the extended family. A woman of strict morals and fierce loyalty, Chloe had invited everyone. It was designed to be an execution, a public shaming to corner Harper in front of the entire bloodline. Harper arrived exactly 20 minutes late. She wore a simple black dress, her posture completely straight, her eyes fixed and unblinking. The moment she walked into Martha's grand dining room, the conversation died. Over 30 relatives turned to stare at her with disgust. Derek was leaning against the fireplace, glaring at her. Chloe sat at the head of the long oak table, sipping a mimosa. Aunt Martha stood by the window, her face tight with disappointment. Chloe stood up, adopting a voice dripping with fake sorrow. She addressed the room, saying how tragic it was that Harper had chosen greed over family. She claimed Harper had manipulated their dying mother and was now trying to dodge a legitimate $50,000 debt. Murmurs of anger rippled through the aunts and uncles. Derek shouted from the fireplace, calling Harper a parasite who had stolen his childhood home. The room grew tense. Aunt Martha finally spoke. Her voice stern. She looked at Harper and asked if she had anything to say for herself. Harper walked slowly to the center of the room. She did not defend herself. She did not yell. She simply reached into her purse and pulled out a small wireless speaker. She set it on the polished mahogany dining table. She connected her phone. Harper looked directly into Chloe's eyes. Then, she hit play. The scratchy audio from Beatrice's old recorder filled the dead silence of the dining room. Chloe's voice echoed off the walls, coldly suggesting they dump their mother in a state facility to take her money. Derek's cruel. Lazy laugh followed. Agreeing that the old bat had lived long enough. The color instantly drained from Derek's face. Chloe froze, her wine glass halting halfway to her mouth. The relatives gasped. Aunt Martha took a step back, her hand flying to her chest in horror. Before anyone could speak, Harper switched to the second audio file. The crystal-clear recording from her kitchen played loudly. The entire family heard Chloe arrogantly admit to forging the promissory note. They heard her boast about paying a corrupt lawyer to ruin Harper with a fake document. Pandemonium erupted. Aunt Martha's face turned crimson with absolute fury. She pointed a trembling finger at Chloe, calling her a monster. Uncles started shouting at Derek, calling him a disgrace to his father's name. Right at that moment, the front door chime rang. Aunt Martha's husband opened it, and in walked Frank, the gruff neighbor from Fishtown. He stood in the doorway, taking off his worn baseball cap. Frank looked at the furious crowd and pointed a thick finger straight at Chloe. Frank announced to the room that Chloe had come to his house 2 days ago, offering him $10,000 cash to commit perjury and testify that Harper had abused Beatrice. Frank spat on the floor and said he told her to rot in hell. The destruction of Derek and Chloe was absolute. The family turned on them like a pack of wolves. Chloe tried to stammer out a defense, her corporate composure shattering into pathetic, desperate tears. Derek backed into the fireplace, looking around like a cornered rat. Abandoned by everyone, Aunt Martha walked up to Chloe, her voice shaking with rage. She told Chloe she was no longer part of this family. She ordered both of them to get out of her house and never come back. Derek looked at Harper, pleading, his arrogance completely gone. He begged her to let him come home. Harper stepped close to him. The room fell silent again, listening to her every word. Harper looked at the man who had abused and neglected her for 8 long years. She spoke in a voice as hard and cold as diamond. She told Derek that when she got back to the apartment, his bags had better be packed, and he had better be gone. If he was still there, she would have him arrested for assault. And she had the locksmith as a witness. Derek crumbled, weeping openly as his uncles shoved him toward the front door. The next evening, the sun set over Fishtown, casting long, golden shadows across the narrow streets. Harper sat alone in the living room of the brick row house. The mess had been cleaned. The silence in the house was no longer suffocating. It was peaceful. It was sacred. She sat in Beatrice's old green velvet armchair, a warm mug of tea resting in her hands. Her cell phone vibrated on the side table. It was Arthur Vance, the estate attorney. His voice was warm and respectful. He confirmed that the fake debt had been legally destroyed and that the title of the house, along with all of Beatrice's assets, had officially cleared into Harper's name. No one could ever take it from her. Harper ended the call and looked out the front window. Outside, the neighborhood was changing, rushing forward into a ruthless new era. But inside these walls, she was completely safe. She was entirely free. Harper closed her eyes and took a deep, unrestricted breath, knowing that in the end, Beatrice was the only one who truly saw her worth.